Let's take a look at break-even point for a company. We'll take a look at what the break-even point is, how we can take a look at it graphically, and how to calculate the break-even point for a company. The break-even point is a sales volume where a company makes no profits and no losses. So it just breaks even. So if a company has sales above its break-even point, it will make a profit. If it has sales below its break-even point, then this company will make a loss. At the break-even point, fixed expenses are equal to total contribution margin. If you take a look at your contribution margin income statement, you can see that if contribution margin minus fixed expenses is equal to operating income, if your operating income is equal to 0, then your fixed expenses are equal to your total contribution margins. So at your break-even point, fixed expenses are equal to total contribution margin. At this point, your total sales is also equal to your total expenses. Let's take a look at your break-even point on a graph. You have your y-axis and your x-axis. Your y-axis represents dollar amount and x-axis represents volume. First, we will be drawing our sales graph, sales revenue graph. Your sales revenue starts at 0 and it's a straight line extending upwards. The reason it starts at 0 is that if you sell 0 volume of units, you have 0 sales revenue, and then it extends on. The slope of the graph is the sales price per unit. Next, let's draw our mixed cost line. Remember, mixed cost is the total of fixed plus variable cost. Our mixed cost line will start at our fixed costs point, so somewhere along here on your y-axis, and then it will extend upwards in a straight line. Again, you know that the slope of this mixed cost line is equal to your variable cost per unit, and the point where it crosses the y-axis is your fixed costs. The point where these two lines intersect is your break-even point. That's your break-even point. The cone that extends to the right of your break-even point is your operating income. The green stripes represent your operating income. The left side of your break-even point represents operating losses. Now let's take a look at how to calculate break-even point. We use 3 methods to calculate break-even point: the income statement method, unit contribution margin method, and the contribution margin ratio method. First, let's take a look at the contribution margin income statement method to calculate the break-even point. Using this method, we calculate our break-even point in sales units. So the number of units will be our answer. Your contribution margin income statement, you know that it says sales minus variable expenses minus fixed expenses is equal to your operating income. At your break-even point, your operating income is 0. So we get sales minus variable expenses minus fixed expenses is equal to 0. Let's assume that X is our sales volume at break-even, and that we're going to solve for X. For all these examples, we're going to use that e-tail poster business that we were looking at earlier, case poster business, and you can pause and go back and look at your data if you want to keep up with this discussion. So we know that sales price was $35, so our sales revenue would be 35 times X, or 35X, where X again is the volume at break-even point. Your variable cost per unit was $21, so your variable expenses would be 21X. You remember your fixed expenses was $7,000, and at break-even this would be equal to 0. So you simply solve for X. So you're going to simplify 14X is equal to 7,000, and X is equal to 7,000 divided by 14, which will give you 500 posters. So your break-even point is 500 posters. If you sell 500 posters, this company doesn't make a loss, doesn't make a profit. The second method to calculate break-even point is to use your contribution margin per unit. When you're using this method, you have to use this particular formula. The formula says units sold is equal to your fixed expenses plus operating income divided by contribution margin per unit. Now let's use our numbers from that example to calculate our number of units sold. We already did it once, so you know that we're going to end up with 500 posters, but let's go ahead and do the calculation. We know our fixed expenses were $7,000, and at break-even point, our operating income is going to be 0. We divide that by our contribution margin per unit, if you remember, which we calculated earlier to be $14, which gives us our units sold to be 500 posters. Our third method was to calculate our break-even point using contribution margin ratio. When we use our contribution margin ratio, we calculate break-even point in sales dollars. This time it's not units, it's going to be in dollars. Your formula for calculating this is going to be sales in dollars is equal to fixed expenses plus operating income divided by contribution margin ratio. Using the same example as before, we know that our fixed expenses is $7,000. Our operating income is 0 at break even, and then we divide that by our contribution margin ratio, which we calculated to be 40%. So we divide that by 0.4, which gives us our break-even sale to be $17,500. Again, this particular formula calculates does not calculate your units, but calculates your break-even point in sales dollars. Let's take a look at those two shortcut formulas that we used again. One thing I want to point out before we move on is that these two formulas are very alike. If you notice, they both have fixed expenses, they both have operating income. The only difference is your denominator. If you divide that numerator by your contribution margin per unit, you end up with your sales in units. But if you use your contribution margin ratio, you end up with sales dollars. So that's an easy way to remember which formula to use when. Now, do companies only want to break even? Do companies always want to make sure they only break even? No. Companies want to make sure that they earn a profit. If a company has a target profit that they want to earn, they can use these formulas to figure out how much sales they need to make in order to earn that target profit. So let's take a look at that next. Let's assume that our company doesn't want to break even, but they want to have a profit of $4,900 during this period. The question is, how many units do we need to sell, and how much does our sales dollars need to be? Let's take a look at how we would calculate those numbers. First, let's calculate units to be sold. So how many units do we need to sell? We know that our formula says the number of units we sold is equal to our fixed expenses, which we said was $7,000, plus operating income. This time we wanted to earn a profit of $4,900. We want to calculate sales in units, so we're going to divide these two numbers by our contribution margin per unit, which was 14, which gives us 850 posters. So we need to sell 850 posters to earn a profit of 4,900 or an operating income of 4,900. Let's use the second formula. This time we're going to calculate sales in dollars. Again, 7,000 is our fixed costs. We want an operating income of 4,900, and since we're calculating sales in dollars, we're going to divide it by the contribution margin ratio, which is 0.4. And that will give you $29,750. You can also double check your answer. In requirement 1, you said we need 850 posters to make a profit of 4,900. You know that each poster sells for $35, So we can calculate sales dollars also to be 29,750, which is the same answer we got when we used that shortcut formula for number 2.